true innovation doesn't happen because you're rolling out new products or innovative products or things like that on a consistent basis. Innovative companies are the ones that understand it's this culmination of all these consistent little steps throughout the whole organization that really makes you innovative, because everybody can have a great idea because they're the ones who really know their work and they can see the inefficiencies. And when they're encouraged and invited to talk to each other and look at what happens before they're handed a task, or where does it go from here, and they start to look at things more holistically and from a bigger picture, they're the ones who truly have great ideas that may come on a smaller scale, but it all tends to shift the culture and the direction of an organization because they can see the impact and how these little steps add up to the really big outcomes.
So you're a smart business committed to innovation, to service and to modern marketing, and you're asking, what's next? Wondering how you can become even more innovative. My name is Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and this is the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Hi innovators, it's that time of week again, and it's great to be back with another episode of the InnovaBuzz podcast. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. Now, I'm really excited today to have on the podcast as my guest, Carla Johnson, who's a global keynote speaker, a best-selling author, and a storyteller. Carla has helped many businesses leverage the art of storytelling to inspire action. The latest of her 7 books, Experiences, the 7th Era of Marketing, sets the benchmark for a new era in marketing. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transformational Marketing Academy, a community of awesome coaches who are transforming their clients in highly impactful ways. The Transformational Marketing Academy is full of marketing tips and information, and I think you'll find the posts and information really helpful, and I'd love to have your insights and input to add to that mix. You can join the Academy on LinkedIn by visiting innovabiz.co/TMAC. That's TMAC. There's no charge to join, and while you're at it, you might want to download our transformational marketing map. And that's at innovabiz.co/TMMAP. In our discussion today, Carla talked to me about frameworks, structure, and context around ideas and innovation. She talked about using stories and using metaphors in marketing and in selling your ideas to your organization and also to your clients. And she shared a great example of using an experience from a totally different context in your own work, and that's based on a Barbie doll video. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Carla Johnson. Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today. And I think you're still in Barcelona in Spain. I didn't actually check in the pre-conversation. It's Carla Johnson of Type A Communications. She's a global keynote speaker. She's a best-selling author, and she's a storyteller. Now, Carla has helped many businesses leverage the power of storytelling and the art of storytelling to inspire their audience and their market into action. And she's just published the latest of her 7 books, which is called Experiences, the 7th Era of Marketing. And it kind of sets the benchmark for that new era in marketing that she talks about in the book. So welcome to the podcast, Carla. It's a great privilege to have you as a guest.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here today.
Andrew Davis, who was our guest on InnovaBizz episode 129, suggested that we interview Carla and introduced us. So a big hello to Andrew.
Hello, Andrew. You know, he's a guy with a lot of ideas. He's so fun to listen to, and I'm sure he was a riot to have on the podcast because I loved that episode. He was a lot of fun,
and I just watched his his loyalty loop video on the Uber driver who does karaoke in the car, and it was so funny. But a great message. So hello, Andrew.
We were talking a little bit about storytelling a few minutes ago, and he is a master storyteller. And it's so great to watch somebody who's good at something because they really make it look simple.
All right. Now you travel the world today teaching anyone and everyone how to cultivate idea-driven teams. And I know we talked a little bit about that in the preamble, and also how to breed unstoppable creativity and how to have game-changing innovation in their organisation. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about that today. But before we talk about all things innovation, creativity, marketing and storytelling, let's find out a bit more about you as a person. So when you were a young child, what did you want to do when you grew up?
Let's see. When I was very young, I was animal crazy, and particularly horse. I loved horses, and I grew up on a farm in a really small town in the middle of America. And when I grew up, I wanted to be a veterinarian. And then as I got into middle school and high school, I wanted to be an electrical engineer. And that's what I studied for the first few years of university.
Oh, that was a bit of a change.
It really was. Yeah, it was.
All right. And how did you end up then in kind of business and marketing?
It's kind of been an interesting path for me, and one of those where you think that you should have this grand plan for your education or your career, but sometimes when you just follow what makes you happy, you end up in a really great space. And I feel like that has been my situation, because I went to engineering university to study engineering because I have 4 older siblings who were really left-brained, and so I followed that path. But just a few years in, I realized I was significantly more right-brained than I realized, and this structure of engineering wasn't for me. So I changed my major, and I have a graduate degree in history, actually. But what I did learn from the technical side of engineering, I was able to take when I started one of my first jobs, and that was doing marketing for an architecture and engineering firm. And that was the beauty of the blend between engineering and history, because history really taught me to research and look for patterns and the storytelling of a situation. And engineering taught me that technical side. So it was my ability to take that technical and turn it into a story that works so well in architecture. And then there was an amazing experience, or I guess discipline, that I learned in working with architects that I brought into marketing. And that was that ability to start with, what's the feeling that you want somebody to have when they experience your brand or your product? And in their case, it's buildings. And then how do you create that experience? And then you reverse engineer that into your strategy. So that has just been fundamental to me as a marketer in the work that I do.
Yeah, I really love that. It's a great journey, and kind of when you, as you said, reverse engineer the journey in a way that gives you some ideas around that framework, and a framework for marketing, which is something that I really love when there's a good framework there. Now, you talked about... Sorry.
I was going to say, I love that as well, frameworks and showing people how to think instead of, templates about exactly what to do all the time. You talked a lot about storytelling and how your history major gave you some insights perhaps into storytelling. Was that something you kind of are naturally talented at, that you or did you learn that through your history studies or through other things? I would say it's a little bit of both. I grew up in a very storytelling-oriented family. My grandfather is Danish, and he immigrated to the U.S. when he was 14. And so I grew up in this part of America that had a lot of European immigrants. And I would, as a little girl, sit around and listen to them when all of our neighbors got together, or if we had family get-togethers, and they would tell story after story after story. And so if it wasn't a natural talent, then it was something that I grew up around and was so familiar with. And it's amazing how, even if it's a story that you've heard over and over and over again, when it's told really, really well, it's fabulous to watch and see how that just attracts the audience and makes the same people enjoy it again and again. And I think it's that mastery of creating a narrative, infusing that tension, and understanding how that creates such a strong emotional bond with people. So I'd say, that's where I really started my storytelling process and my storytelling love. I just didn't realize it because it was the kind of culture that I grew up in.
Yeah, yeah. And when did you realize that this had a direct application in the work that you were doing?
To be honest, it was probably about 10 years into my career, because I just, going from university and into was history and then into the architecture profession, all of that was so natural that I assumed all marketers knew how to do that. And then I we lived in Omaha, Nebraska, and we moved to Denver, Colorado. And I got a job there in a telecom firm that was very product oriented. And all of a sudden, there was no storytelling. It was really more about, here's what we have to sell, here's the features and benefits and all the technical aspects of it. And I thought, how do these people get anybody to be interested in what they have to sell? Because to be honest, it was so boring. But they said, this is what the engineers who make the decisions, they love this stuff. And that's all they could focus on is what those engineers wanted, and what I now realize is the really bottom of the funnel decision making. And in that role, it was a great experience because we took the company through an IPO and it went public. And so in that case, we had to spend so much time telling the story of the company and the value that we delivered to customers. And it was during a big shift in how the company itself and talked about itself. So that was amazing for me to really watch a company transform through that over a couple of years and see how employees connected differently with the company, because finally they really understood what the company was about beyond just what it was that they sold.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's still all too common today that businesses sell the technical aspects. I mean, it's hard to even get them to focus on benefits to the customer. They kind of are so enamored by the features of their product or services, let alone take those benefits and turn them into a story around the customer experience.
So absolutely. And I think when you get to very engineering-driven companies, they definitely are enamored with what they've researched and put together, and it's hard for them to step back and see what that means to somebody else.
All right. So now we talked a little bit before we started recording about the work you're doing around innovation. So tell us a little bit more about what you do and why you do it.
It was so interesting as I've come through this path of storytelling and understanding how stories are what create the experience for people. And then after the last book that I wrote with Robert Rose came out, and I would speak about it and I would give workshops about it, one of the main things that I heard people say is, I love having a framework for how to create these story-driven experiences, but I feel like we're still doing some of the same things. Like, how do I get people to say yes to something that's truly different and unique? And that's what prompted me really to start digging into this idea of creativity and innovation and what do people think about ideas? Because one of the things that I would see over and over again is that a brand would see something else that another company had done, generally a competitor, and they would essentially try and just copy and paste it into their own organization. Or even if it was something outside of their industry, it was this copy and paste mentality, kind of like the template versus a framework. And rarely was it successful. And so I started to look at where do the most successful people get their ideas? And of course, naturally, I went back to architecture because that's what I knew first. And when you look at some of the most successful designs in architecture and art, and then into storytelling in movies and stories, and you listen to the creators of these things, they tell these amazing stories of having an experience, and it was something about that experience outside of their work that triggered something for them. For example, the women who started the company called Rent the Runway, where you can rent high-end women's fashion clothes for a short amount of time. They said, men can rent tuxedos, but women can't rent gorgeous gowns like this. What if we created the same kind of company with a Netflix approach? And so they were able to look at what worked in a different industry and take the essence of it, not just copy and paste it, and then they could relate that into their own work and make it successful. And so that's what I see with innovative ideas, is that people are able to observe things that are going on in a different part of their life or in a different culture or in some other manner, and then distill that into seeing the patterns and understanding the essence of why that actually works, and then relating that essence into the work that they do. And that's how they start to generate ideas. So they come at their challenge or their customer need or their marketing approach with a really fresh and unique, different mindset. And that's why they're able to consistently put out work that's exciting and amazing and, really keeps us wanting to know what's around the corner.
Yeah, I love that approach. And we raised frameworks earlier, but the idea of looking at how somebody else has done something, but then looking at what's behind that in terms of the experience, in terms of the structure of what they've done, in terms of the principles that they've applied, and how can you then take some of those learnings and apply it to a different situation or a different customer experience. I think that's what the essence of what you're talking about, is it?
Absolutely. And it seems really, really simple, but it's that ability to understand and then relate it into the work that's so hard to do because that's not a skill that we practice.
Yeah, and in some ways, fundamentally, it's taking another model and learning from the model, which is the way we kind of learnt as children anyway, but in a way that you're not actually copying it, you're putting your own unique experience on the framework.
Exactly, because you see that all the time with little kids and Legos, and you'll ask them what they built, and they'll say it's a ginormosaurus or something where they blended a Tyrannosaurus with a giant building or something, and they blend those in their mind. They're so practiced at putting those ideas together.
Yeah. Now, the other thing you mentioned earlier when we were having our intro was around the democracy of ideas. And I'm interested to hear some more about that, because I think today there's a discussion around open sourcing. So I work in the website space, among other things, and WordPress now powers something like 30% of the websites on the internet, and it's an open source system. And the whole principle behind that is that because it's open sourced, there's a massive community of developers around that can add to the platform, and therefore it ends up being better than it would be if it was owned by a company and it was kind of confidential and only those people in the company could work on it. So tell us a little bit about this whole idea of democracy of ideas.
That's a great analogy, because we see that with WordPress, we see it with Linux in the technical space. And in a lot of organizations, when it comes to innovation and great ideas, what has happened is that they have set up a specific group who's responsible for new ideas, and they tend to be very product or service oriented. So you may have a research and development group, you may have a specific group that's tasked with innovation. And what happens is that group gets siloed in their own area because they're supposed to focus on one thing. And even if it's innovation in that one area, they're isolated from everybody else within the company. And a couple of things start to happen from the cultural dynamics in these organizations. One is that if you ask somebody else within the organization, somebody in marketing or IT, about come up with something that's new and innovative to approach what's needed for a customer need, they say, no, that's not our responsibility. That's the responsibility of the innovation group. Like, they're the ones who own that. Mm-hmm. Or people will say, I don't know if I'm smart enough, because it's the innovation group who they have the PhDs, and they have the people who know anthropology, or they know design thinking, or they know all of these. They have all of these somewhat special criteria in the minds of everybody else in the company that they don't have. So they don't think that they can be the innovative ones or the ones who can come up with these monumental great ideas. But in companies that say, we don't just innovate, like these companies that focus on research and development and having these specific innovation groups, there's the ones who really focus on how do we innovate what we do. But in the other kind of companies, I say that they're innovative versus they focus on how to innovate, because they look at how can anybody in the organization bring a great idea to the table. Because true innovation doesn't happen because you're rolling out new products or innovative products or things like that on a consistent basis. Innovative companies are the ones that understand it's this culmination of all these consistent little steps throughout the whole organization that really makes you innovative, because everybody can have a great idea because they're the ones who really know their work and they can see the inefficiencies. And when they're encouraged and invited to talk to each other and look at what happens before they're handed a task, or where does it go from here, and they start to look at things more holistically and from a bigger picture, they're the ones who truly have great ideas that may come on a smaller scale, but it all tends to shift the culture and the direction of an organization because they can see the impact and how these little steps add up to the really big outcomes.
Yeah, well, there's so much in that I'd love to unpack. I mean, there's the idea of culture of innovation within an organization, and I think that's a fundamental thing to achieve what you were talking about, that it really is everybody's job to be innovative if the organization says that we're an innovative organization. But then there's the question of, if you have that culture, how do you recognize a good idea as an individual? How do you sell an idea that you have to the organization? How do you, convince enough people that there's merit to pursuing that idea so that it actually develops legs and is explored and perhaps ends up contributing to the bottom line?
And that goes back to looking at this process that some of the most innovative people and teams all over the world use. And a lot of times they don't even realize that they use it, these people who consistently come up with great ideas. And that's that ability to observe what's going on in the world around them, distilling that into patterns that they can see, and then relating that into their company in a way that makes sense. And then they start to generate the ideas. Because when you start like that, your idea feels not so crazy because you've rooted it in something that in general anybody else in life can experience. The next thing is that when you start to pitch that idea, because just like you said, we have to prove that it has merit. We have to prove that people won't be crazy or lose their job or hinder their career in some way if they support us. So if we tell the story through a pitch that brings people along on this idea journey, all of a sudden we've started to take out the feeling that this is a risky idea. And granted, it may be a stretch, but when people can get context for an idea and the story that you tell for a new idea, that makes it feel less scary. And all of a sudden changing something in an organization when you've done something one way, for some companies, decades, in some countries over 100 years, all of a sudden it becomes a little less risky to say yes, to start to doing something new, even if it's on a small test kind of scale. But that's what's so important is like you said, to prove that it has merit to at least take the next step and start to work through it and, do some minimum product kind of concepts for ideas. And how do we make processes better? How do we make processes more simple for our customers so it's easier for them to do business with us?
Yeah, that's great. And I think the framework that you outlined there is one that I think would be helpful if we understood that a little bit better in terms of actually being more structured around how we do this. And like you say, we're a lot of innovative people probably follow that framework without necessarily knowing it. It's just in their DNA, if you like. I wonder, you talk about fear of failure being the biggest barrier to innovation, and how do you use that framework and the story part of it to remove that fear, or at least turn it into, as a guest of mine said the other day, turn the fear of failure into a fear of missing an opportunity?
And that is so important, because in an organization, we talked a little bit about the culture of an innovative company is in organizations, what we do is that we essentially teach them, this is what we do that makes us successful. This is how we function as a business. This is what we believe. This is how we behave. And then you introduce a new idea into that organization, and that starts to push at the boundaries of what's been okay up until then. And when you do that, that's when people have their fear activated, because they say, this is too much risk, and this is too outside of all that we've been told is okay for so long. And so when you are able to tell that story in a way that gives people context and understanding, and bring along the thread of where you've been as a company, and what has been successful and what has worked, and how this new idea actually continues to bring that forward or evolve it in a way that's helpful and beneficial and oftentimes really necessary for a company, that's when you start to connect the dots for people, and they don't feel like they're jumping off a cliff and who knows what's going to happen and where they're going to land. But they start to see a path forward for them that makes sense. And when they can emotionally connect those dots, then they feel less fearful because they feel less risk. It doesn't mean that it's not risk at all, but it at least starts to put things into context for their mind and connect it with all they've been taught that is okay for their company culture in the past.
Do you have a story or an example that you can illustrate kind of this whole process with?
One of my favorite idea people is Kathy Button-Bell, and she's the chief marketing officer for an industrial technology company in St. Louis, Missouri called Emerson Electric. And as I've watched Kathy over her career, she is, I would say, this ideal type of innovator, because she is almost magical in her ability to experience anything and find that really rich value in a pattern, in an idea, in something that she's experienced, and relating that into her company and using that to come up with ideas. And I'll give you an example of one of the things that she's done recently that's been tremendously successful for her company, is that she was watching some YouTube videos. She has a son who's finishing up college, and at that age, that's what kids love to do, is watch the YouTube videos. So they were watching one, and she happened to come across one from Barbie that had dads playing with daughters and going through role playing, and they were talking about what Barbie means and what that father-daughter relationship is like. And she said she was watching that, and she could see just the honesty and the conversation between the fathers and the daughters, the humor that came out of the playful situations when they were role playing together with the dolls, and a lot of other details. And she says she could see what this all distilled into. The patterns that she could see was about true showing who you are, and in Barbie's case, being innovative in how you present your brand. And she took a group of these things that she distilled from what she observed, and she related that into the work that she was doing at Emerson. And they were getting ready to launch new values to the organization. And there are 75,000 people all around the world. And she said, if we could take that ability to be fresh and really honest and funny, and bring that into an engineering culture that thinks that they're very left brain, but actually has so much personality and emotion. She said that's really what she would love to do as they launch this their values globally to the employees. So she used those first 3 steps of observing, distilling what she saw, relating it into her brand. And it was only then that she looked at generating ideas for how to roll this out. So they did some really fun and creative things in how they presented the values and made employees a part of the story of what it means to the company. But one of the key things that they've done that made it so successful is that they took that idea behind the dad and daughter Barbie video, and they used that in a video to announce their own values to their own employees and what it meant to everybody. So instead of having an executive, we've all seen those corporate videos with the, talking head saying, this is what this means to us, and on and on and on and on, or even some supervisors and fun music and things. She had kids of employees come in from different locations around the world, and they gave them the words that they have that represent the values, and they had the kids explain what these values meant. And it was tremendously successful because it really brought out the humanity in the company, because when your kids hear you talk about your work every single day, you see what rubs off on them. So then you start to see, what does the values of our company mean as we pass them on to our family and other people? Because values aren't just what you're like when you're at your desk at work. It's what you're like as a person and what you believe. And it was so fun to see. Some of these were little kids and hear them tell the funny stories and explanations of what some of these words meant. And employees loved it. And it was that joy of having, some fun and the connection between the serious engineers and adults and, finance and IT people, and bring it in with the joy and kind of that naive connection and how kids explain things that made it so successful. And Kathy's just one of those people who naturally follows this process. And you can see that throughout her career and how she's able to bring fresh, wacky ideas into a very data-driven, left-brain organization.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example. It intrigues me, though. I thought of something as you were telling that story, and that's I often find myself thinking in that first phase, perhaps, so something like the Barbie dad and daughter video, and thinking, wow, that would be something to apply in this other area. And then there's a disconnect in terms of how do you translate that into something that actually delivers value in this other area. And so it kind of, the idea gets lost. And I just wonder how many ideas break down at that stage, because people do see a framework, they see a structure of something, they like what it is, they think that I really like that, I wonder how that could work in my situation, but then that translation step doesn't work, if you like. I don't know how to describe that better, but what are your thoughts about that in terms of actually taking that and crossing that barrier, whatever it is, into the other realm?
I think you hit what so many people, not just in marketing, but in every area of an organization, really struggle with. So there's almost like 3 types of people who are looking to generate an idea. What we have a lot of times is that we have a boss or a client who says to us, we need a new idea about fill in the blank. And so you get into a room and they say, let's brainstorm this and, let's see what kind of ideas we can come up with. So you're in this cycle that's about generating the ideas and then pitching them to try and get approval. But when you do that, that's when you focus on, here's the idea, but there's no context for it. And people end up saying, they start to kill those ideas because they say, we're not that kind of company. We don't sell that kind of a product. That's just not what we do. And people get frustrated all the way around, because here's these teams investing a tremendous amount of time coming up with ideas that they think are great. And here's the boss or the client or whoever who's saying, I can't get any realistic ideas. These are all just crazy. And I think one of the dynamics that we saw this up a lot was a few years ago with the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And everybody wanted something, that was big and viral and would catch on like that. And that was what they used as their criteria. How do we make something big and viral instead of looking at what really happened to make that campaign a success? And then you have the second tier of maturity, and that's where just what you talked about. Somebody may see something, be it a coffee shop or a theme park or anywhere, and they say, I really like that, or I really like this dad and daughter Barbie video, but I don't know how to bring that into the work that I do to generate it. So they observe, and what they tend to do is try and copy and paste that into their idea generation. And again, there's no context for it. And that's why things break down and you end up with work that isn't inspired. So that next level of maturity is people who are able to observe what's going on around them. And then they look for those patterns. They start to actively identify them. So is it things such as, like if you're in a coffee shop, is it about efficiency as people go through line? Is it about making sure it's a relaxed environment and you're welcome and feel invited to stay and lounge? Is it about access to amenities such as Wi-Fi or other things that you can do there? Is it something just as crazy as, there's trash all over the floor, the staff is rude, I really feel like I never want to come back here again? So being able to distill what it is that you observe into these patterns that we see. And as humans, it's really interesting. Our brains are genetically wired to see these patterns. And if we just give ourselves pause and enough room to step back and say, okay, what are some of the patterns that I'm starting to observe? And even, jot them down on a napkin or a little piece of paper and start to identify those. And then this, to be honest, this is the hardest step, is to start to relate that into the work that you do. But for example, for marketers, if they're looking at a challenge around customer experience, and they've gone to this coffee shop and they've observed what's gone around, they've distilled it into some patterns such as efficiency, or the luxury of the experience, or how awful the experience was. Then they can start to ask themselves, as to relate it into their work, are questions such as, how might we start to make our processes more efficient for our customers? How might we start to make our customers feel like they have, like they're being treated like they're in a luxurious hotel, or it's a luxurious experience? Or even things like, how might we be creating situations that are really awful for our customers that we don't even see? Back to the trash on the floor and the staff. And then when you start to take those and say, how might we start to address some of these and use that as the foundation for generating ideas, then that's how you start to bring the ideas of that experience, what people felt in that experience, into the work to generate ideas. And that's where everything all of a sudden starts to feel very different, and people really just light up. And then they use that to pitch their ideas. Because when you do that, when you pitch an idea and you start with, here's something I observed the other day, and you get into some detail about it, and then you tell people, of all of this that I saw, here's the pattern that I saw. And I started to think, how could we do that as a brand? And then that's how you came up with your idea. When you pitch an idea, what that does is it brings people along for the journey. And it's storytelling in a way that gives it context for people's brains. And then they're able to connect with it. Because one of the things that I've seen that is so critical is that even the best of ideas can get killed with bad pitches, because we don't know how to help someone else see the idea that we see and what we can do with it. And when we don't present ideas in a way that gives people context, what it does is it activates something that I call brand detachment disorder. And they're not able to see the essence and the genius behind another idea and how it can relate to the work that they do. And so they start to detach from that other experience. Emerson and a lot of Kathy's coworkers could have said, we're not Barbie. We don't sell little plastic, dolls, and we don't do that. We're a serious engineering company. But she was able to translate that idea and relate it into her brand in a way that made sense and tell that story over and over, that people were excited to see it come to life.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of borrows a lot from the storytelling process that I believe you teach. I mean, you certainly talked about it in a lot of the publications that I looked at, and that's widely using metaphors to put things in context. And the example you gave there of the restaurant where, let's say there's rubbish on the floor. Now, the staff in the restaurant might not even notice the rubbish anymore, but the customer comes in and sees the rubbish there. And so that becomes the metaphor in the different context. What's the rubbish on our floor that we don't see and our customers don't like?
Exactly. And when we think of it that way, all of a sudden people in an organization go, wow, I never thought of it like that. And it gives them heightened awareness as they go back and they go through their day-to-day activities. And they start to say, oh, wow, maybe this isn't as cool for our customers as I thought it would be, or as efficient or anything else. And it makes them think differently.
Yeah, it's great. A great approach. And I really like the framework part of it, to put it into context and develop it. Because one of the things that I was involved in years ago in the corporate world was building a product development framework and process for a chemical company. And one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome was the so-called innovative, creative people in the research division who said, no, we can't have this constriction on our creativity. And yet, once we developed the framework and had it put in place in a way that got everybody involved in contributing to a product development idea right from the beginning, including customers, which was quite innovative, it totally transformed what we were doing and just generated a whole lot more ideas and got us focused very quickly on what were the best ones to pursue.
That's a real common misconception about creativity and innovation and great ideas, is that there's no structure to them. And people think that it's just, like talented and gifted people are the ones who walk into a room and here's something, they're like, here's an idea, here's an idea, here's an idea. And it's just that they're so practiced
like lightning, right?
Exactly. And it's just that they're so naturally practiced at this, whether they realize it or not, that they can do it. And that's the truth, is that there can be structure put to all of this. And people can be taught to think more creatively and to be more innovative. They just need to practice it. So like anything you learn, you feel more confident and you're more skilled at it.
And so you do a lot of workshops around teaching that now.
I do. And it's really fun to watch people in their mind just start to open and see how that can happen, both from really coming up with new and fresh ideas, but also, like you said, presenting them, pitching them in a way that shows that they have merit, because people want to do great work and people want to do work that excites them. And then when they see here's a process and a framework that I can now use, they feel empowered and passionate and confident. And probably most importantly, they feel courageous. And when you have somebody come into your office and they feel passionate and confident and they have the courage to do this about a new idea, you as a boss are more likely to say yes, because we all know what happens when somebody comes into our office. They're like, yeah, I'd like to give this a try. And there's no passion behind it. And it just fizzled out. And it's frustrating because you want your teams to bring great work forward. And so it's a way to empower them to feel that they have more control and that there's more that they can do to make ideas go through an organization.
All right, this is fascinating discussion. I could keep talking for ages, but I'm respectful of your time. And so I think it's time to go on to the buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who they see themselves as innovators and leaders in their field, and we'd like to give them some tips from your experience. So we've got 5 questions, and hopefully you'll give us some really insightful answers. Now, I'm really looking forward to the answers to these, because some of them we've probably already answered in a lot of detail, but we'll see how we go here.
Okay, right. This sounds good. I feel like I'm in the hot seat now.
All right. So what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I would say practice. Because with anything that we do, the more we do it, the better we get at it.
Yeah, that's right. And what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Travel. I think exposing ourselves to situations and people and cultures and foods and ideas that are very different from our own really helps us see that there's so many opportunities for great ideas out there.
That's right. And I didn't actually confirm with you at the beginning, so you're in Barcelona right now.
I am. Our family, we moved here for a year for that exact reason, is to just have a different perspective and different experiences.
So you're doing exactly that. Brilliant.
Yeah.
What's your favorite tool or system for improving your productivity and allowing you to be more innovative?
Oh my gosh, my productivity is something I'm hugely focused on right now, and I am pulling different tactics from agile methodologies. So one of mine that I use is a Kanban board, and then the Pomodoro. So the Pomodoro breaks work down into 25-minute increments. And when I do my Kanban board, which on sticky notes, I list each thing I'm going to do, starting with what's to do, then I move it to an in progress column, and then I move it to a done. So I'm super visual. And this is really helpful for me because it shows progress for me. It also shows how much I think I have on my plate and whether I should say yes to more things. And then it also helps me estimate my time. So I get a true understanding of, am I saying, oh yeah, I could do that, no problem, because I think it's only going to take 15 minutes when actually it takes me 4 hours. So that's a huge thing for me.
Yeah. And I love the Pomodoro idea too, because I often start something and then 3 hours later, because I'll focus on that, and 3 hours later, is it that time already? I did want to do these other things.
Exactly.
So Pomodoro, and we'll link to these things in the show notes. Pomodoro, for those people that aren't familiar with it, basically has you set a time and the timer goes off at that time, and then you make a conscious decision to, you can elect to continue working on that particular item, or you can say, well, no, that's the time I'd allocated. Now I'm moving on to the next one. All right. What's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
I think communication. I think that there are so many times between teams that we make assumptions on both sides, and we know what's going on in our head. And even there's times where I hear people say, well, I didn't communicate that to the client because I didn't have an update. Even not having an update is something you need to communicate to a client or to anybody, a team member. I think we need to be more clear and precise in our communication.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we're trying to improve our own communication there with the clients. Exactly what you say there. If we, everything's on track, we haven't needed to intervene or do anything. And I say, well, let's send that update to the client, because
exactly
it might be boring, but at least it's the communication and everybody knows what's going on. All right. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Understand what it is that they stand for. And one of my favorite books ever is a book by a man named Roy Spence. And he wrote this book called It's Not What You Sell, It's What You Stand For. So for me, it was a fabulous introduction into the idea of brand purpose. And even if you sell something that everybody on your same business street sells, if you're able to differentiate yourself through the story that you tell, that's how you stand out. And that's one of the best books I've ever read that teaches people how to do it.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that book. I'll have to look that up, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. I think there's a great example of what you've just mentioned that's quite topical at the moment, and it's the Nike ad with Colin Kaepernick. Is it Kaepernick?
Yes.
That's very clear. I mean, it's sort of a little controversial in some circles, but they're very clear on what they stand for there, aren't they?
Exactly. And people think, well, we don't want to do something that's too strong because then it might turn people off. But the more efficient you can be with identifying really clearly, this is what we stand for, you realize that you eliminate a lot of waste in your marketing and your sales and even your research and development areas, because people aren't wasting time pursuing things that don't truly contribute to the essence of your brand.
Yeah, that's great. All right, what's the future for you and your business now?
Right now, it's starting on book number 8 about how to bring essentially how to rethink innovation, and what it is that the most innovative people and teams in the world what it is that they do and how they bring these great ideas to the table that really turn into phenomenal business outcomes. And looking at that process and documenting that in book number 8. So that's it, at least for this next year. And I think for me, it's always pursuing things that I find interesting and fascinating and help others be better at what it is that they do.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to that new book. So maybe a year's time or maybe less.
Well, I really enjoy Barcelona. So, it's a struggle between being productive as a writer and enjoying everything in Spain.
Yeah. All right. So what's the number one piece of advice you'd give to any business owner who wants to be a leader in innovation?
I would say is to ask. I think that there are so many times when we make assumptions about what it is that we know, and or we go and we ask too few people for input. We ask through not enough channels. So doing surveys are great, but it's not the only way to get information. And I think it's that ability to sit face to face with people, customers, and ask them questions and ask them if you can be a part of their day just to observe. Ask other people who are your counselors, your trusted advisors. What are things that I need to know that I'm not seeing? I think there's so many times we make assumptions that we know everything, and we become blind to what we don't know.
Great advice. So, face-to-face interaction with a customer, who would have thought?
I know, and it's so funny. Like marketers say, we're very customer-centered, or companies even say we're very customer-centered. But if you go and ask the executives, especially, when was the last time you sat down at a customer's location and you spent an entire day with them to see what they do? There's very few. So to be customer oriented and centered, you actually have to spend face-to-face time with customers.
All right. Well, thank you, Carla. This has been really great. Where can people reach out and say thank you for all that you've shared with us? Absolutely.
Well, my website is carlajohnson.co. And I am on Twitter at Carla Johnson and also on LinkedIn.
All right. We'll have that in the show notes as well, so people can just click through. Finally, then, who would you like me to interview on a future InnovaBuzz podcast and why?
I think a great person for you to interview would be Sun Yu. And he wrote a book that came out, I want to say about 6 months ago, called Iconic Brands. And he has a fascinating background with innovation at some top name brand companies and things that he's learned and why you should really innovate the old, not create the new. I think he would be a great guest for you.
All right. Well, we might get an introduction from you, but Sun Yu, if you're listening to this, look out for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Carla Johnson. So thanks so much, Carla. I really appreciate you spending time with us on the InnovaBuzz podcast today, and I've had a ball having conversation around innovation. I've really enjoyed it and learned quite a lot. I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. It was a great time.
I hope you enjoyed meeting Carla and, as I did, noted some actions you'll take as a result of the great advice she shared with us. My regular listeners know that I'm a big fan of frameworks, and I particularly loved Carla's explanation of a framework for innovation and generating ideas in one context, then transferring them to another. I'd love to know what you took away from Carla's interview. Leave a comment below the blog post, which can be found at innovabiz.co/Carla Johnson. That is CarlaJohnson, all lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Carla Johnson. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Carla there, as well as links to all the resources that we mentioned. Carla suggested I interview Sun Yu of Iconic Advantage on a future InnovaBuzz podcast. So Sun, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Carla Johnson. Remember to visit innovabiz.co/TMAC, TMAC, to join our Transformational Marketing Academy and access all its information, marketing tips, and so on. And of course, we'd love to get your insights to share there as well. Stay connected. Head on over to iTunes or Stitcher or Pocket Casts and subscribe to the InnovaBuzz podcast so you make sure you'll never miss another episode. We'd also love you to leave us a review because what you think matters. Take some of the ideas you've heard today and apply them in your business. Any thoughts, ideas, suggestions or questions, share them in the comments below the blog post. And remember, if you want to get better marketing results than you ever have, join our fantastic LinkedIn community at the Transformational Marketing Academy. All you have to do is go to innovabiz.co/TMAC. It's free to join. Hope to see you there soon. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember to be awesome and keep innovating.